My son-in-law called me just after sunrise and said, very calmly, almost cheerfully, "I emptied your accounts and sold the house. We're flying out tonight. Goodbye, old man." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't even ask how. I just smiled, because he had no idea that every document he touched was fake, every dollar he thought he stole was bait, and every step he took after that phone call was already being recorded, logged, and prepared for the police. When the officers met him at the airport, right as he was about to board his flight, he collapsed to his knees and screamed so loud that people pulled out their phones to film it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you were listening in the comments. But before I tell you how it ended like that, you need to understand who I am and why trying to rob me was the most expensive mistake of his life. I read far more of those than people think. My name is Leonard Hayes. I am 70 years old, and I live just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, in a quiet adobe house that most people underestimate the moment they see it. That habit, underestimating me, has followed me my entire life. For 42 years, I worked as a forensic accountant specializing in financial fraud, estate manipulation, and asset tracing. I testified in courtrooms across 3 states. I unraveled shell companies. I followed money that people swore could never be found. I made a career out of proving that paper lies, but patterns don't. Colleagues used to joke that I could smell fraud the way some people smell smoke. Tiny inconsistencies, numbers that didn't quite breathe right, documents that looked perfect until you stared at them long enough to notice what didn't belong. When I retired, I planned on a quiet life. Gardening, woodworking, restoring old ledgers and antique bookkeeping journals I collected from estate sales. I own more than 200 original financial records dating back to the 19th century. Real ink, real mistakes, real honesty. Things you cannot fake without eventually revealing yourself. What I did not plan for was having to use every skill I'd ever learned to protect myself from my own family. My daughter, Emily, is 34 years old. I raised her alone after her mother died when Emily was 12. I worked late nights so she could go to a better school. I skipped vacations so she could have piano lessons, summer camps, braces, everything she needed. There was a time when she would sit at my kitchen table, swinging her legs, asking me to explain how money moved through the world. I taught her what I knew: how to read a statement, how to spot a lie hidden in numbers, how honesty always leaves a trail. Somewhere along the way, that curiosity turned into entitlement. The real shift happened 4 years ago when she met her now husband, Marcus Vale. Marcus is 36. On paper, he's a property consultant. In reality, he floats between short-term commissions, online sports betting, and borrowed confidence. He dresses well, talks fast, laughs at his own jokes. He has the kind of charm that only works on people who want to believe him. The first time Emily brought him to my house, he didn't comment on the art, the books, or the garden. He asked how much the land was worth. That was my first warning. Over the months that followed, his curiosity became invasive. He asked about trusts, about beneficiaries, about whether I'd simplified my finances yet. He framed it as concern, as preparation, as love. I recognized the language immediately. It was the same language men used right before they drained accounts, rewrote wills, and disappeared. I didn't accuse him. I didn't confront Emily. I watched. And when Marcus finally called me that morning, bragging about selling my home and emptying my accounts, I realized something important. He thought I was old. He thought I was alone. And he thought paperwork was just paper. He was wrong on all 3 counts. The trouble with predators is that they rarely rush. They test. They probe. They wait for weakness. Marcus started visiting more often after that first dinner. Always unannounced. Always polite. Always carrying the same smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd wander through my house as if he were already measuring it for furniture that wasn't his. He asked casual questions while pretending not to care about the answers. "How long have you lived here, Leonard? Ever think about downsizing? Must be hard managing all this by yourself." Emily sat beside him, nodding along, never meeting my eyes. I noticed how she'd stopped calling me Dad. Somewhere along the way, I'd become Leonard. Formal, distant, disposable. One afternoon, Marcus lingered in my study longer than usual. I returned from my walk early because the clouds rolled in fast, thick with the kind of storm that turns the desert dark in minutes. When I stepped inside, I heard a drawer slide shut. Marcus jumped like a teenager caught sneaking a drink. "Oh, didn't hear you come in," he said. "Just looking for a pen." I gestured to the holder on my desk, filled with at least 20. "Plenty there." He laughed, grabbed one, and turned to quickly. I caught the reflection on his phone screen before it went dark. Photographs. On my desk. My files. My financial summaries. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I made a list. Not accusations. Not emotions. Facts. Within the week, I installed discrete cameras in my study. Not cheap ones. Not obvious ones. Professional-grade equipment, the kind designed for evidentiary recording with encrypted backups and redundant storage. I'd spent a lifetime testifying in court. I knew what evidence had weight. For the next month, I watched. Marcus came over twice while I was napping. Both times, he went straight to my study. He photographed documents, opened drawers, tested locks, measured the filing cabinet with his phone. He wasn't browsing. He was planning. Emily's role became clearer soon after. I'd walk into the room and see her quickly lock her phone. Messages left open just long enough for me to read fragments. "Dad's been forgetful lately. He doesn't double-check things anymore. He trusts me completely." They were building a narrative, not just theft, incapacity. The part that hurt wasn't the scheme. I'd seen worse from strangers. It was watching my daughter rehearse concern like a performance. She'd bring me tea I didn't ask for, ask if I'd taken my vitamins, speak slowly as if I were already slipping. Marcus watched me carefully during these moments, studying my reactions, measuring how far they could push. One evening, they came over together and sat across from me in the living room, posture stiff, expressions rehearsed. "Leonard," Marcus said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, "we've been worried about you." I waited. "You're alone out here. What if something happens? A fall? A medical emergency?" Emily reached for my hand. Her grip was firm, calculated. "We just think it might be time to let us help manage things. Temporarily." "Manage what?" I asked. "Your finances," Marcus said smoothly. "Legal matters. The house. Just until things are more settled." I looked at my daughter, the girl who once asked me to explain compound interest at age 10. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm managing just fine," I said. Marcus smiled, but it tightened at the edges. "Of course. Just something to think about." That night, Marcus called me. His voice had lost its warmth. "You're getting older, Leonard. You need help whether you admit it or not. Emily and I have decided we're stepping in, with or without your cooperation." The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone and felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. He'd made his mistake. Threats are a confession when spoken to the right person. The next morning, I called my younger sister's son, Daniel Hayes. He's 45 and runs a small but formidable estate law practice in Albuquerque. Smart, quiet, precise. We met at his office overlooking the river. I told him everything, showed him the footage, the photos, the messages. Daniel didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "They're planning to forge authority," he said. "Power of attorney, asset access, maybe even a sale." "I know," I replied. "I want to stop them." He shook his head. "No, you want to finish them." He was right. Over the next several days, we built the framework. Quietly, legally, thoroughly. Every legitimate asset I owned, my house, my retirement funds, my investment accounts totaling just over $1 million, went into an irrevocable trust. Daniel became trustee. On paper, I owned nothing. What remained were shadows. Decoys. I created realistic statements, plausible balances, properties that looked valuable but weren't mine to sell. Numbers large enough to tempt greed, but structured to collapse under scrutiny. And then I waited, because predators don't notice traps when they believe the prey is already weak. Once the legal foundation was in place, everything changed. Not on paper, not in the trust documents, but in how I behaved. Because traps don't work unless the person walking into them believes they are in control. Daniel and I had already finished the most important work. Every legitimate asset was untouchable. My home, my savings, my long-term investments, all of it legally invisible, sealed behind structures Marcus didn't even know existed. Now came the performance. I started leaving my reading glasses in odd places. Asked Emily to remind me what day it was. Pretended to struggle with my phone when Marcus was nearby. I repeated stories. Misplaced keys. Small things. Harmless things. Enough to confirm the narrative they were already building. Emily leaned into it immediately. "You told me that already, Leonard," she'd say gently, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Maybe you should write things down more." "Dad, you forgot to lock the back door again." All lies. Marcus's eyes lit up every time. The more fragile I appeared, the more confident he became. He stopped hiding his curiosity. He asked questions openly now. "Do you still keep everything in that filing cabinet? Is this your main account? Or do you have others? Have you ever thought about simplifying your paperwork?" I answered carefully. Half-truths, misleading details, nothing provable, everything plausible. One evening over dinner, I casually mentioned that I was thinking of taking a short trip north. Maybe a couple of weeks. Clear my head. Visit an old colleague. Marcus didn't even pretend to hesitate. "That's a great idea," he said too quickly. "You should go." Emily smiled. "We can watch the house while you're gone." I nodded. That would help. That night, after they left, I prepared the final pieces. I placed a folder labeled Important Documents in the filing cabinet Marcus had already tried to open. I unlocked it deliberately. Inside were the decoys. A property deed to a modest-looking house in a nearby town. Bank statements showing balances just north of $200,000 spread across several accounts. A blank power of attorney form, placed neatly on my desk beside a pen. I made no effort to hide it. Greed does the rest. The night before my trip, I watched the camera feed from my bedroom. Marcus moved through my study like a child sneaking cookies. Slow, careful, confident. He found the form. Watched him sit at my desk and practice my signature. Over and over, adjusting pressure, angle, stroke length. It was almost flattering how seriously he took it. He filled out the power of attorney, forged my name, and stamped it using an old seal I'd intentionally left accessible. He didn't know I'd altered that seal years earlier. A microscopic deviation, invisible to anyone but an expert. I watched him photograph everything and text Emily. "This is it. We're set." Her reply came seconds later. "How much?" "Over $1 million total." A flurry of celebratory messages followed. Plans. Hotels. A wedding date suddenly urgent. I turned off the tablet and lay back. The trap was closed. The next morning, I hugged my daughter, shook Marcus's hand, and drove away. I made it 3 blocks before pulling over. Sat there for a long time, hands on the wheel, thinking about how many times I'd warned people about trusting appearances. Then I drove north and waited. The first alert came 2 mornings later, just after dawn. I was sitting in a small cafe north of Taos, stirring coffee I hadn't tasted yet, when my phone vibrated softly against the table. Unauthorized access attempt detected. I didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't even open the message right away. I finished my coffee first. By the time I checked the alert, 3 separate transactions had already been initiated on one of the decoy accounts. Clean, methodical, split carefully to avoid automated flags. Whoever was doing it knew enough to think they were being clever. Marcus always did think he was the smartest man in the room. I called the bank. "Leonard Hayes," I said calmly. "I'm calling to report suspected fraud on one of my accounts." There was a pause as the representative pulled up the file. "Sir, it appears someone with power of attorney is accessing the account." "That document is forged," I replied. "I never authorized it. I have video evidence of the forgery, timestamps, and the individual responsible. I would like this escalated to your fraud department immediately." The tone changed instantly. I made similar calls to 2 other institutions that afternoon. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Each created another record, another timestamp, another official note that would become impossible to erase. Meanwhile, Marcus was celebrating. He called me that evening, voice thick with fake concern. "Just checking on you, Leonard. Making sure you're taking your medication." "I am," I said. "Thank you for looking out for me." We've been doing some paperwork here. Nothing urgent. We'll go over it when you get back. Translation: I'm already spending what I think is your money. The next day, the property move began. Marcus had taken the fake deed to the decoy house and initiated a sale through a private investor. Cash offer. Quick close. No inspections. I knew this because Daniel knew the investor. The buyer was cooperating fully. Every document Marcus submitted was copied, logged, tracked, every signature analyzed, every message preserved. By the third day, Marcus had what he believed was access to over $1 million. In reality, he'd successfully withdrawn just under $5,000 of actual funds. The rest was vapor. That afternoon, he called again. This time, the excitement slipped through. "Leonard," he said, barely containing himself, "we've taken care of everything for you." I let the silence stretch. "We sold the house, cleared the accounts. You don't have to worry anymore. Emily and I are starting fresh." Starting fresh. That phrase again. "You sold my house," I said slowly. "Yes, for a very good price. Everything was legal. You signed the documents." I don't remember doing that. There it was. The hesitation. The crack. "Well," Marcus laughed nervously. "That's why we stepped in. You've been confused lately." "I see. We're flying out tonight. Vegas. Quick wedding. You should be happy for us." In the background, I could hear laughter. Music. Celebration. Emily's voice chimed in. "Tell him we're not coming back." Marcus came back on the line. "Goodbye, old man." I waited until the call ended before moving. Then I made one more phone call. This time to the police. I didn't raise my voice when I called the police. I didn't need to. Men who panic give themselves away. Men who speak calmly are listened to. "Leonard Hayes," I said. "I need to report financial fraud, identity theft, and forged legal authority." The individuals responsible believe they've already succeeded. They're preparing to leave the state tonight. There was a brief pause. "Sir, do you have evidence?" "Yes," I said. "Extensive. Video, financial records, metadata, and corroborating witnesses." That changed everything. By mid-morning, I was on a secure video call with a detective from the state's Financial Crimes Unit. His name was Aaron Caldwell. Mid-50s. Sharp eyes. The kind of man who didn't interrupt because he didn't need to. I walked him through the timeline. The surveillance footage. The forged documents. The decoy accounts. The attempted withdrawals. The staged property sale. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "They think they're getting away with it," he said. "They're already celebrating," I replied. He nodded once. "That's good. Good." That word carried weight, because crimes committed in confidence leave the cleanest trails. By early afternoon, federal authorities were looped in. Interstate intent. Wire fraud. Forgery involving financial institutions. It added up quickly. The plan was simple. Let them finish. Let them pack. Let them boast. Let them walk into public with the weight of their certainty pressing down on them. Arrests are more effective when the suspect believes the story is already over. I returned home quietly that evening. Not to the house Marcus thought he'd sold, that belonged to the trust now, but to a smaller place nearby I kept for exactly this reason. Modest, unremarkable, invisible. I sat at my desk and reviewed everything one last time. Each video clip labeled, each call logged, each transaction time-stamped. This was what I'd done my entire career. Truth doesn't shout. It documents. Around sunset, Marcus called again. His voice was loose now, drunk on victory. "You should see the hotel," he said. "This place is incredible." "I'm glad you're happy," I replied. "You always wanted me to take care of Emily," he said. "I guess I finally did." He laughed. I said nothing. "Tomorrow," he continued, "everything changes. New life, new future. No more worrying about you." I pictured him standing in an airport terminal, luggage beside him, phone glowing with numbers that didn't belong to him. I waited. At 9 minutes past 2 the next afternoon, my phone buzzed. There at the airport. I set it down and poured myself a glass of water. At 14 minutes past 2, another message arrived. "Warrant approved. Team in position." I sat very still. At 21 minutes past 2, my phone vibrated again. "Subjects in custody." I closed my eyes. Not in relief. In certainty. Because when you've seen this ending hundreds of times before, there's no surprise left in it. Only completion. I wasn't at the airport when they arrested Marcus and Emily. I didn't need to be. Some things are better witnessed secondhand. Once the noise has settled and the truth has nowhere left to hide. They were already through security when it happened. That part mattered. It meant there was no confusion about intent. They weren't just thinking about leaving. They were leaving. Marcus had just finished checking his phone for the 10th time in as many minutes, admiring the balances that would soon freeze when two men approached from opposite directions. Plain clothes. Calm. No rush. Marcus Vale. One of them said, badge already visible. We need to speak with you. Marcus smiled automatically. That reflex again. The charm. The assumption that everything could be smoothed over with confidence. Yes, he said. Is there a problem? You're under arrest for forgery, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit interstate financial crimes. The smile didn't vanish right away. It cracked. Emily stood up, so fast her chair tipped over. This is a mistake, she said loudly. My father is confused. He doesn't know what he signed. The officers didn't respond. They didn't argue. They didn't explain. They handcuffed Marcus first. That's when he started to panic. No, he said. No, this isn't right. The documents are legal. He signed them. I have them. One of the agents glanced at him. We know. Emily started crying. Not quietly. Not with dignity. With the kind of crying meant to draw attention, to summon sympathy from strangers. People were filming now. Always filming. Marcus tried to pull away when they guided him toward the exit. You don't understand, he kept saying. The money is real. Check the account. Check it. They did. And that's when he dropped to his knees. Right there on the terminal floor. He screamed. Not words. Just sound. Raw and animal. Emily tried to reach him, but another officer stopped her. You're being detained as well, he said. You can save your statements for your attorney. They separated them immediately. That was deliberate. Conspirators fall apart when they can't reinforce each other's lies. By the time they reached the station, Marcus had cycled through anger, denial, and bargaining. Emily went straight to accusation. She blamed Marcus, then me, then the officers, then the world. In Marcus's interrogation room, the detective placed a tablet on the table and pressed play. Footage of him in my study, photographing documents, practicing my signature, filling out the power of attorney. Marcus stared at the screen. How did you get this? He whispered. Your victim documented everything, the detective replied. That's entrapment. Marcus snapped. He set me up. He protected himself, the detective said calmly. You chose to commit the crimes. In Emily's room, the tone was different. They showed her the messages. Her messages, the ones where she coached him, encouraged him, celebrated. She stopped crying halfway through the third video. Just stared. When they finally asked if she wanted to call someone, she asked for me. I declined. By the end of the night, bail was denied. Flight risk. Both of them were processed, photographed, and placed in holding cells. The wedding was officially canceled. The next morning, the world felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful, just empty in the way a house feels after a storm has passed through it. I drove into the city before sunrise, the roads still dark, the desert air cool enough to remind me I was still alive and still in control of my life. At the federal building, I met with two people who would now take the lead where I stopped. Detective Caldwell was there as promised. So was a federal prosecutor named Elaine Porter. Early 40s, sharp voice, eyes that didn't soften when she spoke. They didn't ask me how I felt. They asked me what I could prove. That told me everything I needed to know. We sat in a small conference room with a long table and no windows. I laid out the evidence again, this time slower, more deliberately. Surveillance footage, transaction logs, forged documents, metadata, witness cooperation, the decoy structure. Elaine Porter nodded as she flipped through the files. This is one of the cleanest fraud cases I've seen in years, she said. They didn't just attempt theft. They demonstrated intent at every stage. She tapped the folder. Interstate wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, conspiracy. Marcus was looking at a minimum of 15 years. Emily would face less, but still enough to permanently alter the shape of her life. When the words were spoken out loud, something inside me shifted. Not relief. Finality. Are you prepared to testify if this goes to trial? Porter asked. Yes, I said without hesitation. They're going to try to paint you as manipulative, she warned. They'll say you baited them, that you engineered this. I nodded. That's fine. Most parents would hesitate, she said. I'm not most parents, I replied. And she stopped being a child when she decided to steal from me. Later that afternoon, Emily's attorney called. He spoke carefully, chose his words like stepping stones across thin ice. She wants to talk to you, he said. She's remorseful. She's afraid. I corrected. Silence. That's not the same thing. The call ended shortly after. Marcus's attorney tried a different angle. Claimed desperation. Claimed addiction. Claimed misunderstanding. The evidence erased every excuse. They had laughed. They had celebrated. They had planned to flee. Intent doesn't disappear because a plan fails. By the end of the week, the charges were filed. Publicly, the story made local news. Daughter and husband charged in elaborate fraud scheme targeting retired forensic accountant. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. People I hadn't spoken to in years called to offer sympathy, advice, opinions. I ignored most of them. Justice doesn't need an audience. That night, my phone rang again. The jail. I answered this time. Dad, Emily said. Her voice was small, broken. I made a mistake. No, I said. You made a series of choices. I was influenced. I was angry. I felt entitled. Yes, I replied. That's the truth. She cried. I let her. When she finally asked if I could help her, I told her something I hadn't planned to say. I already did, I said, by stopping you from becoming someone worse. I hung up before she could respond. Some lessons only land when there's no comfort left to soften them. The courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant. That was the first thing I noticed when I walked in. Not fear, not anger. Paper. The scent of archived lives. Of ink pressed into permanence. Of decisions already made, but not yet spoken aloud. It was a smell I had known my entire professional life: boardrooms with their polished veneers, arbitration chambers with their artificially softened lighting, regulatory hearings where people spoke in careful abstractions while entire futures sat mute inside manila folders stacked in orderly columns. Truth, waiting to be formalized. I paused just inside the doorway longer than etiquette required, letting the atmosphere assert itself. Sound arrived in layers. A low hum of murmured voices, restrained and cautious. The scrape of a chair leg adjusted an inch too far. The rhythmic cough of someone who had been waiting too long. Courtrooms were not built for comfort. They were designed to remind. High ceilings to diminish the individual. Hard benches to stretch time. Flags and seals positioned precisely to make clear that whatever you thought of yourself, something older and larger was now the authority. Justice was architecture before it was law. I had testified in court before. Many times, usually as an expert, sometimes as a witness. Always on the side of process, not consequence. I had spoken in clean language, backed by documentation, careful to remain neutral even when I knew the outcome my words would produce. Today, I was neither expert nor witness. Today, I was evidence adjacent. There is a particular discomfort in that role. You're not called, but you're present. You are not addressed, but you are seen. You are part of the gravity in the room, whether acknowledged or not. I took my seat in the second row, close enough to see everything, far enough not to be mistaken for family. That mattered. They were brought in separately. Marcus came first, the man I had once known, slick, expansive, always leaning forward as if the world owed him momentum was gone. In his place sat a version reduced by walls and time and the sudden absence of leverage. Custody does that. It removes illusion faster than any moral reckoning ever could. His suit didn't fit the way it used to. Either it had always been too big and his confidence had filled the space, or he'd lost weight in detention. Likely both. The jacket sagged at the shoulders, fabric folding where certainty once lived. His tie was crooked, knotted with the carelessness of someone who no longer believed presentation mattered. Marcus had once treated appearance like armor. Tailored suits, impeccable grooming, a presence calibrated to suggest inevitability. He had believed no, assumed that outcomes bent toward him. That was his true addiction. Not money, not risk, entitlement. Now he didn't scan the room the way he once would have. No inventory of allies. No searching for power. His eyes darted instead sharp, restless, defensive like a trapped animal still hoping for a flaw in the enclosure. When he sat, his shoulders slumped. That was new. Marcus had never slumped. He had leaned. He had sprawled. He had dominated space simply by occupying it unapologetically. Now he folded inward, as if trying to make himself smaller than the consequences pursuing him. Emily came in next, and if Marcus looked diminished, Emily looked stripped. No makeup, not even the careful minimalism she had once mastered. Her hair was pulled back without artistry or intention, secured only because it needed to be out of her face. The polish she had curated so meticulously, the aesthetic of competence, of calm mastery, was gone. In its place, exhaustion, and something far more dangerous than fear. Recognition. Understanding does not arrive all at once. It comes in waves. Small humiliations. Sleepless nights. The slow erosion of self-narrative. The realization that no explanation will restore the version of you who stepped willingly into the lie. Emily wore that realization openly now. She didn't look at the floor. She looked at me. There was no accusation in her eyes. No anger. No plea. Only a quiet, unbearable question she already knew the answer to. Marcus looked away first. Emily didn't. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. The choreography of justice resumed. The prosecutor rose. She didn't waste words. She didn't need to. This case had been clean, almost boring in its precision. No violence. No ambiguity. No tragic accident to soften the edges or complicate the narrative. Just intent. She spoke with measured clarity, laying out facts like stones placed deliberately in a line. Forged authority. Interstate fraud. Conspiracy. Attempted theft exceeding $1 million. Emails. Recorded calls. False documentation. Deliberate misrepresentation. Each item fell into place with the calm inevitability of gravity. She emphasized what mattered most. That success was irrelevant. Intent mattered more than outcome. The law was clear on that. You don't get credit for failing to steal. Marcus's attorney followed. He was a man paid to soften edges, and he did his job competently. He spoke of desperation, of mounting gambling losses, of a man overwhelmed by pressure who made a series of terrible decisions in rapid succession. He said bad judgment as if it were weather, as if it had arrived unexpectedly rather than being cultivated deliberately over time. He did not say greed. He did not say entitlement. He did not say choice. The judge listened without interruption. Her face remained neutral, her pen moving occasionally not to record, but to anchor attention. Emily's attorney took a different approach. He leaned into remorse. Family bonds. Influence. A daughter led astray by loyalty and misplaced trust. He spoke gently, as if volume itself might bruise her further. He framed her as collateral damage rather than co-conspirator, as someone who had drifted into wrongdoing rather than stepped forward knowingly. The judge looked directly at Emily. "Miss Hayes," she said, her voice neither sharp nor kind, "do you understand that your participation was not passive?" The room held its breath. Emily nodded. "Yes," she whispered. Tears spilled freely now unrestrained, unperformed. "I understand." That moment mattered more than anything her attorney had said. Not denial, not defense, acceptance. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood slowly, as if rising required negotiation with gravity. "This was a trap," he said. His voice shook, but not with remorse. With frustration. With the indignation of someone who believed the world had violated an unspoken agreement. "He wanted this," Marcus continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction without looking at me. "He engineered it." The judge didn't flinch. "Protecting oneself from fraud is not entrapment," she said evenly. "Choosing to commit fraud is a crime." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The lie collapsed under its own weight. The sentencing followed. Marcus received 15 years in federal prison. There was a sound when the number landed not from him, but from someone behind me. A sharp intake of breath. 15 years is not abstract. It has shape. It has seasons. It contains birthdays and funerals and entire eras folded inside it. Marcus didn't react. Not outwardly. He stared straight ahead, jaw locked, refusing to give the moment the satisfaction of his collapse. Emily received 5. Her knees buckled slightly, but she stayed upright. 5 years was both less and more than it sounded. Less than Marcus. More than she had ever imagined her life containing. Restitution was ordered. An amount so large, it was almost symbolic. A number not meant to be paid, but to be owed. A permanent tether to consequence. When the gavel struck, something inside me went quiet. Not relief. Not triumph. Settlement. The way a ledger balances. The way a door closes and does not echo. Emily broke then. Her composure dissolved into sobs that shook her frame, the kind of crying that comes not from fear of punishment, but from the sudden clarity of irreversible loss. Marcus remained hollow. As they were led away, chains soft against the floor, Emily turned back one last time. "Dad," she said. The word landed in the room like a dropped glass. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because the moment to be her father had already passed. That role requires trust. What remained was something colder. Something necessary. Justice. And justice, once spoken, does not look back. Life doesn't stop after justice is served. That's the first lie people believe. It's a comforting lie. Clean. Contained. It tells us that wrongdoing has an expiration date, that pain has a clear endpoint, and that once a verdict is delivered, the world gently rearranges itself back into order. We want that kind of symmetry. We want cause and effect to meet neatly in the middle and shake hands. Movies reinforce it. Stories depend on it. Justice in fiction is an ending, a final beat, a full stop. The villain is exposed, the hero exhales, the music swells just enough to tell you how to feel. There's a sense sometimes subtle, sometimes blatant that balance has been restored, that the universe has been corrected. Real life doesn't work that way. There is no music when a verdict is read. No cinematic pause where the weight of the moment is carefully underlined for you. No breathless silence broken by a perfectly timed reaction shot. The words are spoken in a voice that has delivered thousands of them before. They are written down, stamped, filed, entered into a system that does not care how long it took you to get here. And then almost immediately someone asks you to step aside so the next case can begin. Justice doesn't arrive with ceremony. It arrives with paperwork. When it was over, truly over, in a legal sense that allows no more arguments, no more appeals, no more imagined reversals, I walked out of the courthouse alone. Not symbolically alone, literally alone. No one followed me. No one called my name. No microphones appeared in front of my face. The reporters had already pivoted, scanning the steps for fresher expressions, louder grief, sharper outrage. There would be other stories tomorrow. There always are. My role in the spectacle had ended. Whatever satisfaction the public might extract from what had happened would be drawn from headlines, edited footage, and secondhand commentary. It would be shaped by opinions formed in living rooms and comment sections, far removed from the actual cost of any of it. I stepped into the afternoon heat and stood there longer than necessary. I don't know what I was waiting for. Maybe a sense of relief that hadn't arrived yet. Maybe a surge of emotion I'd been told would come. Maybe some internal marker that said this mattered. This is done. Nothing happened. The building behind me remained a building. The street in front of me remained a street. Cars passed. Someone laughed somewhere down the block. Life continued at a pace entirely indifferent to what had just been decided inside those walls. So I got into my car and drove. The desert opened up on both sides of the highway, vast and unresponsive. I had driven that road more times than I could count over the years, under all kinds of circumstances, early mornings, late nights, good days, bad days. Yet that afternoon it felt unfamiliar. Not because it had changed, because I had. The scrub and sand stretched out the way they always had. The low mountains sat on the horizon, steady and unmoved. There were no dramatic clouds, no sudden weather shifts, nothing to match the magnitude people like to assign to moments like these. Just land. as if the desert itself were reminding me how small individual dramas are when set against time, erosion, and geology. How personal catastrophes barely register against the patience of stone. The sky was a clean, merciless blue. No clouds, no haze, no softness, just space. That kind of sky does two things at once. It makes you feel insignificant, and it makes you feel exposed. There's nowhere to hide beneath it. No shadows large enough to swallow regret. No atmospheric effects to blur the edges of thought. I drove with the windows down, letting the heat and the wind strip things away. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't take calls. I didn't need distraction. I needed distance. Mile after mile passed in silence. The road unspooled ahead of me with mechanical indifference. At some point, I realized my shoulders had dropped, the tension I hadn't noticed finally loosening its grip. When I turned onto my street and pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly as it always had. That surprised me more than it should have. After everything investigations, confrontations, nights spent replaying conversations in my head, I had expected the place to feel altered, as if the walls themselves might carry some residue of what had happened, as if the betrayal and its consequences would have left a visible mark. But the house was unchanged. The garden still needed water. The hose lay coiled where I'd left it. The porch boards creaked in the same places they always had. The desert plants out front leaned toward the sun, patient and untroubled. They had survived droughts, storms, neglect, and attention in equal measure. They understood endurance better than most people. Inside, dust had settled on the shelves in my study. A thin, even layer that spoke not of decay, but of time passing quietly. My desk faced the window, as it always had. The chair sat tucked in, waiting, and behind it, lining the walls, were the ledgers. Decades of them. Leather-bound volumes with softened corners. Cloth spines faded by sunlight and years. Some brittle, some still firm. Each one a record of decisions, made carefully, numbers checked twice, sometimes 3 times. Ink faded by time, not by erasure. Signatures written with intention, not haste. They weren't impressive to look at. No one would mistake them for art. But they represented something increasingly rare, continuity. I poured myself a drink and sat down among them. For a long time, I didn't open anything. I didn't need to. Their presence was enough. They were proof not just of work done, but of a way of living. Slow, deliberate, unfashionable. There was comfort in that. Not pride. Pride is brittle. This was something steadier. Confirmation. Over the following weeks, the story moved the way stories always do once they leave the people directly involved. It spread outward. Local news ran its segments. Familiar footage appeared again and again, trimmed to fit the available time. Online clips circulated with headlines engineered to provoke reaction rather than understanding. Comment sections bloomed with outrage, speculation, sympathy, and judgment, often from the same person in the same thread. Strangers debated forgiveness as if it were a philosophical exercise instead of a personal cost. They argued about motive, intent, and consequence with the confidence of people who had nothing at stake. I watched very little of it. Friends and acquaintances asked questions, careful at first, then more direct. Some asked out of concern, others out of curiosity. A few, I suspect, were measuring themselves against the situation, imagining what they might have done in my place. More than one asked if I regretted it. I always gave the same answer. No, regret implies doubt. It suggests an alternative path you believe might have been better. It assumes the possibility that, given another chance, you would choose differently. I wouldn't have. That doesn't mean it was easy. It doesn't mean it was painless. It means it was necessary. What I felt wasn't regret. It was acceptance. Acceptance of the outcome. Acceptance of the damage that could not be undone. Acceptance of the fact that doing the right thing does not spare you from loss. It simply ensures that the loss is weight, that it is not meaningless. Emily wrote to me from prison. The first letter arrived sooner than I expected. I recognized her handwriting immediately. The careful loops, the consistent spacing. Even after everything, she hadn't abandoned her need for control on the page. The letter was long. She explained herself in detail. She contextualized, reframed, defended. There were moments of anger, moments of self-pity, moments where she seemed genuinely surprised that things had unfolded the way they had, as if consequences were a technical malfunction rather than a predictable result. I read it once. Then I set it aside. More letters followed, some shorter, some sharper, some quieter. A few carried a tentative softness, the tone of someone testing the possibility of forgiveness without daring to request it outright. I read each of them once. I never responded. Eventually, I put them all away in a drawer. Not out of cruelty, not out of spite, out of finality. There was nothing left to say that would improve either of our lives. Anything I wrote would serve only one purpose: to reopen a door that needed to remain closed. Marcus never wrote. That didn't surprise me. Silence had always been his refuge. When words might bind him, he withheld them. When explanation was required, he disappeared behind absence. In its own way, his refusal to reach out was the most honest thing he had ever offered. The trust held. The assets remained secure. The structure I had built endured. Not because I was lucky, because I was prepared. That distinction mattered more to me than anything else. Luck is volatile. It cannot be relied upon. Preparation is quieter, less glamorous, and infinitely more durable. It does not eliminate risk, but it narrows the margin of catastrophe. Months passed. Public attention drifted, as it always does. New scandals emerged. New villains took center stage. What once felt unbearable became archival, referenced only when someone needed an example or a cautionary tale. That is both the mercy and the cruelty of attention it moves on. One evening, as summer began to give way to fall, I sat on my porch and watched the sun lower itself toward the horizon. The desert transformed slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Gold bled into red. Red deepened into shadow. The land did not rush the process. It never does. That kind of transition is easy to miss if you aren't paying attention. I was paying attention. I thought about what people often misunderstand when they hear stories like mine. They assume it's about revenge. It isn't. Revenge is loud, emotional, inefficient. It offers temporary satisfaction at the cost of long-term erosion. It consumes more than it restores. This was about responsibility, about understanding that trust is not a feeling. It is a structure, one that must be designed with intention, maintained with discipline, and defended without sentimentality. It's about recognizing that paper matters. Records matter. Signatures matter. The details people dismiss as tedious are often the only things standing between stability and ruin. And it's about something else, too. Something uncomfortable. Underestimating someone simply because they are older is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. Age teaches patience. It teaches pattern recognition. It teaches you that shortcuts are usually detours with better marketing. It teaches you when to stay quiet, when to listen, and when to let someone reveal exactly who they are without interruption. I raised my glass not in celebration, but in acknowledgement. Some lessons cost everything, and some men are worth underestimating only once. The sky darkened. The air cooled. Somewhere beyond the reach of the porch light, the desert settled into night, unchanged by verdicts, indifferent to narratives. Life went on, and so did I. The months after sentencing moved slowly. Not in the way grief drags its feet, but in the way stone settles after an earthquake. Everything was still standing, but nothing was exactly where it had been before. I received formal notices from 3 courts, 2 federal agencies, and 1 restitution administrator. Every letter was polite, clinical, thorough. Marcus and Emily were jointly ordered to repay an amount that, on paper, looked enormous. In reality, it was symbolic. Neither of them had anything left to give. What little money Marcus had managed to siphon was frozen, seized, and absorbed into legal fees before I ever saw a cent. That didn't bother me. Restitution was never the point. The point was stopping them before they erased me. The point was making sure the story ended while I still had my name, my dignity, and my autonomy intact. The news cycle moved on eventually. Another scandal replaced mine. Another villain. Another victim. That's how the world works. It digests outrage quickly and forgets just as fast. But every now and then, someone would recognize me at the grocery store or the post office. "You're the accountant," they'd say quietly. "The one whose daughter tried to rob him." I never corrected them. That was her legacy now, not mine. Daniel visited often during that first year. We'd sit in my kitchen, coffee growing cold between us, talking about ordinary things. Weather, his kids, the slow return of routine. One afternoon, he asked me something no one else had dared to ask. "If you'd confronted them earlier," he said, "do you think any of this could have been avoided?" I thought about it for a long time. "No," I said finally, "because confrontation only works on people who still care about being decent." He nodded. He understood. Emily wrote again, about a year into her sentence. This time, the letter was different. Shorter, calmer, less pleading. She wrote about the silence, about how prison removes distraction until all you're left with is your own decisions echoing back at you. She wrote, "I didn't just try to steal your money. I tried to steal your authority over your own life." I see that now. That was the closest she ever came to understanding. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Forgiveness is not a transaction. It is an ode, and it doesn't undo damage. Marcus, I learned later, had tried to appeal his sentence, claimed ineffective counsel, claimed emotional manipulation, claimed, once again, that I had engineered everything. The appeal was denied without hearing. The law does not reward men who confuse preparation with provocation. Years passed. My hair went fully gray. My hands stiffened in the mornings. I stopped driving long distances at night. Adjustments, not losses. I kept my routines. Gardening at dawn, ledgers in the afternoon, reading by lamplight in the evenings. Sometimes I would sit in my study, surrounded by old documents, and think about how fragile trust really is. How thin the line can be between safety and ruin. People think danger announces itself. It doesn't. It asks questions. It smiles. It pretends to care. And the most dangerous kind wears familiar faces. That is the lesson I wish I didn't have to learn so late in life. But if there is one thing age gives you, it is the ability to survive truths that would have shattered you when you were younger. I'm not proud of how this story unfolded, but I'm at peace with how it ended. Because when everything was on the line, I chose preparation over denial, clarity over comfort, and documentation over hope. And that choice saved me. If you're listening to this and thinking it sounds extreme, understand this. Fraud does not begin with theft. It begins with entitlement. And it ends wherever preparation begins. I still live in the same quiet house outside Santa Fe. Still tend the same garden. Still restore the same old records. Life didn't become louder after justice. It became quieter, and that quiet is something I earned. Thank you for listening.